or whatever it is, I measure my life in phases now of impact, of whose life is better because I was here, right? Because at the end of the day, when all is said and done, all that's going to matter is how we made people think, how we made people feel, and who we helped people become.
Let's impact some men today. I think we're going to do a great job.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Modern Man Podcast. As always, it's a pleasure to have you. Thank you for joining us. And before we jump into the episode, I first want to encourage you to join us as we embrace discomfort, cultivate community, and put wind in each other's sails. Hit that like button, subscribe button, and share this with somebody else that you also know is chasing their potential. Because here at The Modern Man, we're all about connecting men in pursuit of their potential. You could do that. For the men listening, I encourage you to join the Noble Knights group. You see the logo on my hat. It's a group of men in a community helping each other support their goals and, of course, reach the achievements that they strive for in life. Check us out. It's free to join. And, of course, you can always connect with the other guys and talk more about these podcasts. But enough about the Noble Knights and, of course, the Modern Man Podcast. I want to talk about my guest today. As we are in person, I want to say thank you to my guest who came out to spend some time with me here. We have inspirational speaker, best-selling author of Finding Purpose at Work, founder of Purpose Point and the Purpose Summit, one of the world's leading voices on purpose. And it's a pleasure to have Davin Silvano on the podcast. Davin, man, thank you for taking the trip.
Ted, it is my pleasure to be here. It's so great to see you in person. I know we've had a couple times together, but man, I'm just excited to dive in and make some quality conversation, inspiration with you today.
Yeah, I got to say, we met a couple times and there was always quick, brief moments, but very impactful moments, purposeful moments, pun intended. And before we unpack things that you're working on and your expertise in purpose, I first want to give you an opportunity to speak directly to the audience, speak to the podcast, take the ownership, introduce yourself in your own words, tell us a little bit about you, what you do, and then we could jump into the subject matter more.
No, that's very kind. Yeah. I appreciate that. You already gave a very good introduction. It was very gracious. But my name's Davin. I love just, for years, I thought that I would be a teacher. That was my goal. And now in many ways, I look at myself as a teacher, as an encourager, as an inspirer, as a stimulator of thought. I know there's different people out there that would say thought leader, author, speaker, all those. But at the end of the day, I just want to help people find the purpose that they were created for and to help them step fully into that. I want to challenge organizations to step into the purpose that they started with and to invite people to be a part of that, to make a greater impact in the world together. And so I just see myself as a instigator, amplifier, and catalyst of purpose in the world.
Yeah, no, I love that. And instigator is one of my favorite words. So I'm glad you said that as well. And we're going to talk a lot about purpose, and let's first define it for anybody who might be looking for their purpose, or I'm sure we can have an assumption to the meaning of it. But in your words, or the definition that you lean into, what is purpose?
So people have different thoughts on what purpose is. In its simplest form, it's the reason something or someone is created. If you were to look on the back of any product that we have, whether it's a medicine or a cleaning product or whatever, there's this word on the back and it says purpose. And it tells you what that product does, the reason it was created. And I think a lot of times people confuse purpose and why. They use them interchangeably. They use them as, the same thing as a motivation, but they're different. I would argue that purpose is your reason for being and why is your reason for doing. Purpose, you can be very clear about what your purpose is. You can know what you were created to do, but you could lose your motivation to do it. We just talked about, my background and who I am as a author, speaker, inspirer. I'm very clear on what my purpose is, but there's just some days where maybe, like many other people, I have a bad day and I've lost my motivation for stepping into that purpose. So you got to know what your purpose is, but you also got to know what your why is. And those are two different things. And the way that I've defined purpose is we could argue that there's a singular grandiose purpose for our lives spiritually, but on a more practical level, purpose is plural and momentary. I've got a purpose as a husband. I've got a purpose as a father. I've got a purpose as a speaker. I've got a purpose as an author. I've got a purpose as a worship leader. I've got a purpose as, just being a friend. I've got multiple purposes that I could step into at any moment in time. So purpose is really just focusing on who do I need to be in any given moment of time to make an impact in the moment that I'm in.
Yeah, that's fantastic, because I've never heard the concept of multiple purposes, right? I've heard chase your passion and find your purpose and lean into that. Touch on how the multiple purposes can coexist, right? Because sometimes I could be a great boss. Doesn't mean that that same practice equates to being a great husband, right?
Right.
So how can the multiple purposes coexist, and how do some of them overlap?
Yeah, well, so they coexist, they overlap, and sometimes they compete. And you have to figure out, oh, wait a minute, which one am I supposed to step into right now? So when you think about, we'll start with the coexisting piece. So when you look at coexisting, what's the common thread? So many people have shared, that I have a gift of encouragement. And, if that's true, and I hope that it is, then I have to ask myself, okay, who is it that I'm encouraging? There's moments that maybe, as a purpose as a husband, I'm encouraging my wife. As a purpose as a father, I'm encouraging my kids. As a purpose as an inspiring speaker, I'm encouraging whoever I'm speaking to. Encouraging as an author. So the common thread where the overlap is kind of what is the active ingredient that's happening, what's the through line. So in that case, it's encouragement. For someone else, it might be something different. Where the overlap occurs is in the impact of that encouragement. I've often shared that the greatest measure of purpose is who we help others become. And so I asked myself, okay, through encouragement, who am I helping my wife become? Who am I helping my kids become? Who am I helping that person that just heard me speak, that came up to me afterwards off the stage and is like, oh my gosh, you said that and that so impacted me, or I heard you last year at this event and since then I've done this. Who did I help that person become? Or I read your book and I get a lot, and since I read your book, I stepped into this, and who did I help that person become? So that's where the overlap is. And then the competing piece comes into, let's say I need to be fully present as a husband in the moment, or fully present as a father in the moment. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking about something that I need to write, or something I need to post, or something I need to whatever.
Yeah.
This is where purpose is competing. And so I have to ask myself, I've got a dear friend, her name's Dr. Amber Selking. She MCs the Purpose Summit with me, and she wrote a great book called Winning the Mental Game. And she's got a great acronym on how you win the moment, WIN, and it stands for what's important now. And so whenever I find my purposes competing with each other, I have to ask myself, what's important now? And in every aspect, my wife takes precedent, or my kids take precedent over anything that I might need to write or post.
Yeah, no, I love that. What's important now? And we talk about the importance of presence and being present, and whether it's fatherhood, whether it's being a business owner, whether you're driving in your car. And I say that because there's a lot of folks who understand the habit of getting to work and you don't even realize what turns you made. You're just in autopilot, and we find ourselves in that autopilot so long that we forget to live with that intentionality and that presence that's so important. With the work you do with purpose and even helping others become who they can become, how has your journey in the cultivation of your purpose helped cultivate the Davin we see today?
That's such a great question. One of the byproducts, I love, I said earlier that the greatest measure of purpose is who you help others become. I think one of the greatest surprises in life is when you focus on that, is who you end up becoming. And I never thought I was going to become an author. I never thought I was going to be a public speaker. I never thought that we were going to start this thing called the Purpose Summit that would gather hundreds of people from around the world together. I never thought that I was going to step into these things, that these pieces of my life would end up becoming a part of my identity and who I am now. But those all were byproducts of me focusing on my purpose in different moments and who I was helping others become. The byproduct was who I became in the process. And I think there's so many people, you talked about being present. And I would say that purpose and being present are so tied together. So many times our purpose is staring us right in the face, but we're so focused on something we need to get done or somewhere we need to go that we rush by it and we miss it because we're not present in the moment. We're too busy being a human doing rather than being a human being.
Yeah.
We don't know how to be present. The more moments that we can step into the present and step into who we're supposed to be and make the difference that we're supposed to make in whatever room that we're in front of whoever we're in front of, then the outcome is we end up becoming the person that we were created to be in the long run.
Yeah. And it's all about taking that opportunity in the moment and having that breath, that moment of responding instead of reacting, and just trigger response, having the breath to make an informed response to the situation. And in your book, Finding Purpose at Work, you dive into the importance of purpose in our careers. Why is that so important in a world where many recurring topics we've talked about was unfulfillment at work or in life, burnout for some men who are really burning the candle on both ends? Why is it so important is to tap into purpose through our careers?
So we spend more time at work than we do in any other aspect of our life other than sleeping. So if you take out the hours that we sleep at night and you take out the hours that we work, there's very little margin left in the other areas that we spend our life. And once you take stock of that really helps you realize that, wow, I'm going to spend at least a half, if not more, of my waking hours that I'm going to remember at work. And what happens at work shapes who we are at home. You know, if you have a bad day at work, I've seen more people, more marriages fall apart, more families fall apart, more people distracted from being the spouse or the parent that they are because of what happens at work. So we've got two different, ways that this can play out. We could choose to look at our work and our careers as hours spent that we focus on doing what we were created to do and going home and being fulfilled and then going home and giving our families our best. Or we can look at our work as something that we have to do that drains us. And then we go home at the end of the day and we give our families our leftovers.
Mm-hmm.
And that is why that battleground of the workplace is so important. And the other piece of that, Finding Purpose at Work, the name of that book actually has two meanings. There is finding purpose at work in our careers and our jobs. But there's also finding purpose at work in our life. And I talk about this in the book that if you look back over the course of your life, and most of those might be during work, sometimes they might not be, but what were the different moments that were critical decision-making factors in your life that you can almost like put a timeline and then take a tack and pinpoint and say, this was a crucible moment, this was a crucible moment, this was a crucial moment. And those crucible moments shaped the trajectory of my life, or my work, or my career. Those were purpose points in your life. And when you look at that, you could put a through line together as if purpose had a persona. And you could say, man, purpose has been at work in my life, all my life. And there's moments that I can see it and there's moments that I missed it. So I wrote the book kind of with two different, views. One was, yes, how do you find purpose in your work and career? Because that's going to impact most of your life because that's where you spend most of your waking hours. But I also wrote it from a lens of looking into the rearview mirror and looking introspectively and saying, okay, where can I look back and see purpose at work in my life? And where can I step into the future and do more of that?
Yeah, I love that you said that, because my next question was really into that cultivation of purpose, because I've spoken to many men who are like, I'm just here to provide and work. And, it might not be the best job, but it pays the bills and it makes me feel good to support the family. Someone could be in this mode right now, Davin, where they're just not sure what that purpose is. I imagine looking back at those crucible moments, and those could be hints, but lean into a little bit more on how we can cultivate, create, or tap into why we were created.
Yeah. So I would argue that when you look at the landscape of work, first of all, that there's no job that's remedial. There's no job that's not important, right? And one of my favorite and this is not mine, it's been around for a long time, but it goes back to when JFK was visiting the Kennedy Space Center now, and he was going around and finding out what each person there did. And he comes up to the janitor and he asks the janitor, what do you do here? And he said, I'm helping to put a man on the moon. Right. And so you could look at that as the most remedial job possibly at NASA. But he saw great purpose in what he was doing. He had a sense of personal connection to me. Just cleaning these floors allows the people who are maybe smarter than me or whatever to be able to do what they need to do that are going to contribute to a greater mission. And the reason I tell that story is because no matter what we do, no matter what our job role is, no matter how glamorous it may be or how remedial it may be, there is something that we bring to the moment that has a positive impact on others. And I think you can look at that in any job. And if you find that, and you can find the joy in that, and that's what you look forward to going to each day, it gives you meaning and purpose each day to get up and do it again. Now, the other piece of that, which was the second part of what you asked, is where does that come from and how do you cultivate that? We've all been given unique gifts, talents, abilities, skill sets. It's not just about the job. I talked earlier about encouraging. Mm-hmm. I know you don't have to be a teacher or a motivational speaker or a podcast host or a TV personality or whatever to be an encourager, right? You could be a janitor and be an encourager. In fact, there's a great book called The Janitor that's separate from the story that I just told. And it's really, really great. It's about, kind of a spoiler alert, so if you read this book, but it's about a former CEO who, had everything in the world and then he retires. But one of the things that he enjoyed most was while he was climbing the corporate ladder was just encouraging other people. And so he takes a job as a janitor at a company that he was once the CEO of and keeps a low profile. And the new CEO, who's stressed out and working late hours and not being present at home, the last two people in the office every single day are that CEO and the janitor. And there's these series of conversations that happen, and the new CEO doesn't know that he's the old CEO. And it's really great because what's happening is the janitor is encouraging and mentoring this new CEO, and the new CEO doesn't even know it. And so what's happening is the janitor is stepping into those purposes in his role. And so it doesn't matter that he was the CEO prior and that he's the janitor now. He's using the same gift of encouragement that he was given, that he was created with, to step into a moment to positively impact someone else's life. So we all have different God-given gifts, talents, abilities, skill sets, spiritual giftings, insights, wisdom that make us uniquely us. The question is, what do we bring to each moment, regardless of whether that moment is at work, at home, and regardless of what our job title is?
Yeah, I love that. Your position does not determine your purpose. Your purpose takes advantage of the position almost, right?
So I'm going to steal that.
That's yours.
That's really good.
It's yours.
That was good. That was good.
So I would assume that's more playing offense. And I want to shift to defense here because there's some folks who they're in the doing, they're in the being, and they're going after it, but there are thieves out there that can kind of steal that purpose. And I know you talk about this a lot. What are the thieves of purpose that we need to keep our guard up from and watch out for?
This is almost a shameless plug for my next book, so I'm hesitant to answer the question. But the next book is The Thieves of Purpose. That's the title of the book. And I wrote it for this exact reason, was once we've identified what purpose is, and we're like, okay, now I know what it's supposed to be. Well, why don't more people do it? And I wrote this book from a place of pain. I wrote this book from a place of, I've spent the last 10 years traveling, all different corners of the country and parts of the world, helping people find their purpose, clarifying what it is, how you can step into it. Why aren't more people doing it? Why is it such a struggle? What's holding people back? And what I recognize is that there are these thieves of purpose that we all battle, and I'm not immune to them. In fact, I even offer in the book that, I felt a little bit of a hypocrite writing the book, because you hear people say, oh, they wrote the book on that, so they must be a subject matter expert. And okay, maybe I am, but that doesn't make me immune to the things that I'm writing about. And if you've ever read the Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis, that book, that's a hard book to write or to read. And in many ways, this book was like writing that book, because what I was doing is identifying these 12 thieves. So thieves like comparison. We all compare ourselves to others, right? Things like unbelief. We all struggle with believing whether or not we're capable of what we think that we're capable of. Things like distraction. We live in the most distracted society ever. Things like impatient. We live in one of the most impatient societies ever. Things like indifference. There's so many issues out there that are polarizing that we tend to be indifferent to things. And so then we don't step into moments where we can make a difference. So there's 12 different thieves of purpose. I named a few of them. But the reality is, as I wrote this book, I wrote it from a place of, okay, I've identified this thief. Here's how I've struggled with it. Here's the research on it. And here's how I found out how to confront that and overcome that. And, you know, I still battle these thieves every single day. And so it's kind of like walking through a desert, and it's like, hey, I've discovered that landmine. Don't step there. I've discovered that landmine. Don't step there. I've discovered, but I'm still walking through the desert.
Yeah.
Right. And so there are these thieves. So I think a couple things. You have to identify, what is it that you find yourself in your self-talk struggling most with? Do you find yourself comparing yourself to other people and thinking that you're not capable? And there's overlap in the thieves of purpose, just like we talked about purpose. There's overlap in the thieves, right? Because you could find yourself distracted in the moment, comparing yourself to someone else, and then struggling with doubt and unbelief. And I just named 4 of the thieves right there: distraction, comparison, doubt, and unbelief. But they're all intertwined. So it's monitoring your self-talk and say, what's really holding me back?
If iron sharpens iron, so does one man sharpen another. But if you're a man and you're alone or listening to this, then who sharpens you? What's going on, guys? Ted Thayton here, host of the Modern Man Podcast, also founder of the Noble Knights Mastermind Group. And I'm just out here encouraging you to find your circle. Maybe you're on a personal growth journey and nobody around you understands the new mentality that you're possessing. That's okay. You can find an online community that will pour into you, will navigate your goals and navigate your obstacles, share their experiences, resources, and more. Join the Noble Knights Mastermind Group and try us out for free to tap into a community of men helping each other scale up and reach their goals.
Check out themodernmanpodcast.com. When did you realize this needed to spread?
That's a really good question. I don't know if I can pinpoint a date or a time. I think what I can go back to is a pivotal moment for me where I was just running really hard in life. My ladder was up against the wrong wall. I was chasing success. I was chasing the next title, the next amount of followers, the next status, the next size stage, the next whatever. And I realized that I was pursuing success. And I read a book by Bob Buford called Halftime. And that book upended my world. He offers that this world conditions us for success, but we're created for significance. And so there's this tension between success and significance. And one is pursuing things for myself. The other is stepping into moments for others. And those two things are constantly competing with each other. And so once I came to that realization, I almost demonized success. I almost actually, success is one of the 12 thieves in the book. And there's nothing wrong with, I know a ton of successful people who are also living lives of significance, who are making a tremendous difference in the world. But when we idolize success, that's where we become problematic. In fact, Bob Buford offers that you could pursue success and miss out on a life of significance, but it's impossible to pursue significance and miss out on a life of success.
Yeah.
Because we define success in different ways, right? And it's not always monetary. It's not always status. It could be just being the husband I'm supposed to be, being the father that I'm supposed to be, making a difference in just one life. It's the starfish story of thousands of starfish on the beach and just throwing one more in, making a difference to one. You know, I pull a lot of my beliefs from biblical roots, and there's a lot of people that want to be Peters in this world because, you know, Peter was a famous apostle and Peter did this and he was the rock of the church and all these things. everyone wants to be a Peter, but no one wants to be an Andrew. And what I mean by that is Peter wouldn't have met Jesus if it wasn't for Andrew.
Mm.
So Andrew said, Peter, I need to introduce you to someone. Andrew made one introduction. The rest was history. So Andrew had a significant role to play, but a lot of people are chasing the role of Peter, not the role of Andrew. And so you have to be content with the role that you're here to play. And so for me, I've come to the realization that it doesn't matter if I impact one person's life or a million people's life, as long as I'm being a faithful steward of the time that I'm given in whatever room that I'm in. That's all that matters.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've been spreading it, man. And that story makes me feel more like an Andrew, because I start the podcast with connecting men in pursuit of their potential. And when I reflected long and hard on what do I want to dedicate myself to? What do I feel most empowered by? And it's that, making an introduction that flourishes.
That's right.
And if I can make an introduction that flourishes, that brings me joy. I can get nothing out of it, but just, hey, there's somebody you should meet. And watching that become something significant builds significance for me.
Yeah.
And success for me recently has looked like a smile for my daughter after a nap, or a little bit of a burp after giving her a bottle. Like, those are moments that are just as gratifying as when I'm signing my new contract, right? And they're quick moments that come, but they're there and they're present. And I tend to chase those more than the paycheck, than, hours on TV or anything. It's, okay, how do I create and cultivate this feeling of joy, fulfillment, and significance? And it's usually in those small and minuscule things that I've done. Speaking of small and minuscule things, we've said before, small hinges swing big doors. And when we first connected, you were talking about the Purpose Summit. And it's amazing to see what it is and what it's become. And it's been here in Charlotte. And I'm more curious about the seed that was planted and how that came about, because being biblical, faith of a mustard seed's all you need. What was the inception of the Purpose Summit, when you're starting to spread your gifts, your encouragement, and you're realizing this needs a bigger stage, this needs a bigger platform?
Yeah. Oh, so it's funny. We started this podcast with an introduction, and I said, I want to be an instigator, amplifier, and catalyst of purpose. And that's in essence what the Purpose Summit was created to do. And you were just talking about how, you like to make those introductions. And I talked about, being an Andrew. Just last week, there was something that captured me. This is now going to be our 6th year of the Purpose Summit. And I have, quite a library of pictures from the last 6 years, but the last 4 years in particularly, we've always taken a stage picture, if you will, of all of the faculty, speakers, anyone that's contributed to the summit, one big group picture. And I was just going through my album, looking at just the progression of the different lives that have been impacted, and the voices that have been amplified, and the collaborations that have been birthed since. And I look back, and now there's like books by different people who've attended the summit that they've written together. There's companies that have been started from different people that met at the summit that didn't know each other. There's, people working for people that otherwise wouldn't have, companies who've hired other companies, entire missions that have been launched, and nonprofit organizations. I mean, the ripple effect of impact that has come out of that has been amazing. And, I look back and I say, man, I just to be the catalyst, that I'm not taking any credit for any of that, but just to provide the platform for that type of impact to happen is why we started this in the beginning. And so you asked about the inception. I wanted to tell you, I had to tell you that because we've tried to always make sure that that's what the purpose of the summit was meant to do. It's not, a normal conference. It's not a summit. It's a catalytic experience for people to come together and to collaborate and to make a greater impact together than they could alone, whether that's individually or organizationally. And so the Purpose Summit started out of a repurposed, abandoned school building in a blighted neighborhood in Detroit. I had just wrapped up a speaking tour on purpose. I just finished writing my first book, but it wasn't published yet, but the book was done. And I met some amazing people who were speaking about purpose the way that I was, and they were either focused on individual purpose or organizational purpose, helping people step into the fullness of who they're supposed to be, both at work and at home, or organizationally inviting companies back to the founding purpose point for why they started and the impact that they wanted to make in the world beyond just making a profit. And I said, we're going to all of these different conferences and companies and talking about individual organizational purpose. What if we had our own event? And what if it was a 2-day event and day 1 was individual purpose and day 2 was organizational purpose, and all the people who speak about individual purpose speak on day 1 and all the people who speak on organizational purpose speak on day 2, and let's just invite people to the conversation and let's just see what happens, right? Let's just connect the dots. And so we didn't have any money. We didn't have marketing. We didn't have a production company. We didn't have any of that. I had a friend who was running a really good, amazing nonprofit in Detroit that was making a big difference in the city that had struggled deeply from the fallout of 2008. There was a school building, 157,000 square foot school building that had sat in a blighted neighborhood in Detroit that was going to go abandoned. And he had leased that building to help students who might not go to college kind of find their purpose and connect them with companies who can help them find a job. And I thought, wow, this is a great place to do this. And, we didn't know who was going to show up. And 300 people from across the country came, and it was amazing. It was unbelievable. We had a 4-month runway to promote this thing, purely grassroots, just on social media, no paid advertising. And it was a transformative experience. And then, fast forward, COVID happened, and then we did it again in Detroit, and then it grew and it moved to the University of Notre Dame, and we did it at Notre Dame Stadium for 2 years, and then it moved to Charlotte. And so it's, our Lisa, who's our chief experience officer, who's the one who actually makes the summit happen. When I never forgot, when we were at the University of Notre Dame, she said, we went from a blighted school building in Detroit to the University of Notre Dame in 4 years. How did that happen? And I know how it happened, right? God made it happen, but I still look back at that. We never said, we're going to start a conference, we're going to start a summit, we're going to start a whatever. We saw a need, stepped into a moment of purpose to amplify this conversation, to amplify each other's voices, to bring people together. And the byproduct of that was the summit.
That's fantastic. What would the difference look like? And I love painting the yin and yang for folks of the before, that purpose. Let's say there's an organization or an individual who hasn't tapped into it. And then the after of cultivating and tapping into that purpose. What's the difference that you've seen in individuals or organizations that you've worked with in the before and after?
So on an individual part, peace, clarity, fulfillment. When I see people really get a hold of who they are and why they're here, what they're created to do, of when they show up into a room confident of what their gifts, talents, and abilities are, with a completely others-focused mindset of what am I here to contribute versus what am I here to gain? There is a level of peace, clarity, confidence, and fulfillment that I see them walking in life in. And from a company standpoint, organizationally, when I see companies get a hold of this, and they're very clear on who they are and what they're here to do, and they're able to articulate that clearly within the people who work there and in the lives of those that they serve, whether that's their customers, vendors, suppliers, or whatever. There's something that Hubert Joly, he was the CEO of Best Buy. He wrote a great book called The Heart of Business that he calls human magic, this like intangible level of energy and performance that's untapped. It's almost kind of like, if there's that old picture of, kind of like being in a field and pressing down a well, and you're like pumping and pumping and pumping and pumping, and a little bit of water comes out, and you're pumping and pumping and pumping and pumping, and a little bit of water comes out, and you're pumping and pumping and pumping, and a little bit of water comes out. That's what it's like for most organizations that are operating without purpose, right? And they're pumping and pumping and pumping for this quarter's earnings or to survive or to whatever. Yeah. When you get clarity of purpose of an organization, it's like Old Faithful. You just see a gusher of water that just shoots up from the ground and you can't explain it. It's not tangible. It just is the byproduct of what happens when you activate purpose and connect it individually and organizationally.
You set your clock to it.
That's right.
And you know it's coming.
That's right.
For listeners who are lost or unfulfilled in their careers, and specifically this question, and this is actually a requested question from our good friend Jason Harper. For any of the listeners who might look at, they're saying, "Hey, Davin, I'm 50, man. I'm maybe a couple of years away from a pension, or maybe I'm towards the end of my rope. Like, is it too late for me? Like, is it too late for anybody who might think to themselves, oh, I missed that shit?"
It's never too late. It's never too late. So I'll give you 3 examples. The first example I'll give you is my father-in-law. So when I wrote Finding Purpose at Work, and my father-in-law is an amazing human being. He's a retired lieutenant colonel, spent most of his life in the military, then went to go work in automotive, and then retired. And, I gave him a copy of my first book when I wrote it. And I just, thought I'd get like oh, nice job, attaboy. And he said something to me that I'll never forget. He said, I read this book and it gave me a thought that there's still hope for me. And he's like there's still a purpose that I need to step into in my life, and I have to figure out what that is. And he's telling me this in his 60s, right? As someone who was a retired lieutenant colonel, I mean, you would talk about purposeful life. He lived a purposeful life. He still is living a purposeful life. But I'll never forget those words of like, hey, there's still hope for me in terms of purpose. And I both was caught with that, but then also kind of grieved that. Like, did you spend the first 60 years of life without that sense? Like, and when I look back at your life, there was a lot of purpose in it. Were you just not aware of it? So I would say that it's never too late there. The next is Gary Ridge. He's spoken at the Purpose Summit the last 3 years. He'll be there again this year. We've recently started a company together called Heart Count, which is helping companies focus on the well-being and the hearts of their people and helping them find purpose at work. It's an awesome journey. I get to be on with him, but he just retired after 25 years as CEO of WD-40. He doesn't like to use the word retired. He uses the word refired. He says, I've refired my purpose. And so he's like starting all over again, and he's in his late 60s. And then probably the best example that I love so much that our chief experience officer, Lisa, is like, I have to meet her. There's this girl named Sister Jean. Sister Jean is at Loyola, and she's 105 years old. And she just recently wrote a book, like last year at 104 years old, became an author at 104, right, on purpose. And the whole book, it's kind of an autobiography, but it is also kind of going back and looking at all the different crucible moments in her life that helped her step into her purpose. And the way that she ends that book is with I'm just getting started at 105. So it doesn't matter if you're 50, 60, 70, or 105. It's never too late to look at today as the day that you're just getting started.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man. Last 2 questions here is, and you alluded to it before, how has your life changed through this cultivation of purpose?
When I look back at my life, I wasn't sure how, before this work of purpose, I wasn't sure how to measure it. I look back and it was like, okay, well, do we measure our lives, by the amount of money we make? Do we measure our lives by the different titles that we have? Do we measure our lives by, the size house we have, car we have, how many kids we have? Like, how do you measure life? I used to be a Broadway junkie when I was younger, believe it or not. And there was this musical called Rent, and there's this song called Seasons of Love, and it's measuring your life in love. And I used to like the song, but I didn't realize what it meant until now. And so now, I look at measuring my life in faces. And what I mean by that is as I scroll through, whether it's LinkedIn or my own photos on my phone, or just every day when I come home and I see the face of my bride or the face of my kids, or just even looking at you right now, Ted, or thinking of our friend Jason, who's going to listen to this podcast and wonder like, okay, all right, there's still hope for me, or whatever it is. I measure my life in faces now of impact, of whose life is better because I was here. Right? Because at the end of the day, when all is said and done, all that's going to matter is how we made people think, how we made people feel, and who we helped people become.
Yeah. Amen to that, man. And what is it? 525,600 minutes?
That's right. See, I was going to wait for you to start singing. I was going to start. Right, there's someone singing it right now as they're listening to this. That's right.
Oh, yeah. I didn't want to interrupt the answer.
That's all right. That's all right.
It's playing
if there was a piano here right now, I'd start playing and you could start singing.
Oh, that's what I'm talking about. We'll have a little duet going here once we get Jason on board.
He's got some pipes, man. I heard him sing the national anthem. And I was like, woo, wow.
That's his purpose, is making me feel bad about my singing.
I'm like, you need to do more of that.
Yeah.
Not making you feel bad, singing.
Well, which makes me feel good about my dancing. Which it does for me. What is one key takeaway that you hope someone listening will walk away with when it comes to finding and living that purpose?
That it's worth it. I think that there's a lot of people walking through life, going through the motions. They're either in survival mode, or they're in striving mode, or maybe like me, their ladder was up against the wall and they're pursuing success. And there's a trade-off. And that trade-off is going to have to be getting uncomfortable with the uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. That trade-off is going to say, hey, first of all, it's worth it. You get one life. One. There's not a do-over. This is not a rehearsal. No one is going to look back at their life and say, I wish I would have spent more time at the office. I wish I would have had this title versus that title, or this car versus that car, or this house versus that house. And again, I'm not demonizing those things, but I just think there's a finite number on everyone's head, and there's nothing that you can do to add another single hour, minute, or day to your life. And we quantify money, but we don't quantify time. One of the things that I often will share from stage, I'll come off the stage, step down and ask someone in the audience, hey, if I gave you $620,000 right now, what would you do with it? And they would usually say, oh, I'd buy this, I'd buy that, I'd buy that. And I say, you sure? Final answer. And they say, yeah, final answer. I say, okay, now that $620,000 is the only amount of money that you now have for the rest of your life. No matter what you do, you can't earn another penny. How are you going to spend it now? And they have to take time to think about it. The reality is that on average, we spend 620,000 waking hours in our working careers. And we don't measure what we do with those hours. And there's nothing that we can do to add another single one to it. So if you've listened to this, I would tell you that it's worth the pause to stop and look and be intentional about how you're spending your life, how you're living your life, how you show up in each one of those hours, how you show up in each moment, and to start measuring your life differently, perhaps in faces.
I love that. Inspirational speaker, best-selling author of Finding Purpose at Work, founder of Purpose Point and the Purpose Summit, one of the world's leading voices on purpose. Now you all can see why. Davin Silvano on the podcast. I'm not done yet. I just wanted to make sure I gave the title and the name one more time. Last two questions is, one, how can people find you, follow you, connect with you, and get information on the Purpose Summit, your next book coming out, and everything else that you have going on?
Well, that's very kind. I live on LinkedIn. I have a little bit of a LinkedIn problem. It's, it's my people are there. I'm on all social media, but I live on LinkedIn. So connect with me on LinkedIn, send a message. I'll respond. Unless you're some AI bot that's trying to sell me something, then I probably won't, but just send a message. DavinSilvagno.com. You can go to DavinSilvagno.com for all podcasts, books, resources, and you can go to thepurposesummit.com if you want to join us in Charlotte next May at the Purpose Summit.
I love it. I love it. Last question. It's usually the hardest one or the heaviest one. And it's, what's something that you've seen or something that's happened to you that shapes the way you view the world as a man?
My kids. We were talking before this podcast, because you just stepped into being a father. You got a
Still wet behind
6-month
the ears.
beautiful girl. And you asked me kind of like, what surprised you? And I answered and said how hard that fatherhood was going to be. And not in a sense of like, oh my gosh, I wish I wasn't. No. Like, you have to be intentional in today's world. And so whether you're a father or not, I would say that the game has changed. The rules of engagement of life have changed. And in order to live the full purpose of your life, whether that's as a father, whether that's as a husband, whether that's as in any aspect as a man, it's going to be hard because you have to be intentional. And I shared with you earlier that I feel like we have to be more intentional now than our parents ever had to be. And so looking at my kids helps me look at the world differently and say, am I being intentional with my time, with them, with others, right? Or am I just going through the motions?
I appreciate the wisdom. And we have a lot of fathers that listen. Again, Davin Silvano on the podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here in person. And thank you for everything you do, encouraging not just myself every time you've walked in the studio to say hi, but on LinkedIn and just everything you're doing, you're encouraging the world, brother.
Thanks, Ted. Pleasure to be here with you today. Can't wait to do it again.
Oh, yeah, we're definitely going to have to do it again. I'm going to share some of the gems that you left along the way, because a lot of people listening are either driving or maybe they're cleaning around the house, working out. Don't worry, I took the notes for you. The reason something or someone was created. What is your purpose? What are you here for, right? The being versus the doing. You might have the why, but what about the purpose? Why are you doing what you're doing, and why are you being here? Why were you created? Active ingredient for multiple purposes, the overlap, the combating of the different purposes that we might find in our fatherhood journey, in our boss journey, in our entrepreneurial journey, whatever realm you might find yourself in. And the purpose in that arena, how does that overlap into others, and how could it be competing with others? And how can you be intentional and aware of those multiple ingredients? Also, how are we helping others? How are we encouraging others? I'm going to jump down to my notes because you said it so beautifully with measuring success in the form of faces. How do we measure life? Some people think it's chasing the bank account. Some people think it's chasing material things like the cars, the houses. But what if you measured it in the faces, in the amount of smiles that you left in the world, and just be the catalyst? Play defense against the thieves of your purpose, and the purpose is not dependent on the position. Any position, you could still enact your purpose. And are you helping a man get on the moon? No matter what your job title is, you are significant in that role. Do you see how you can bring something to the moment, tapping into that, cultivating it, looking at your past, finding out what those crucible moments are, and leaning into that discomfort? Because as Davin said, it is worth it. Find your peace, find your clarity, find your comfort. And if you're a business owner in your organization, help find Old Faithful so you can set your watch to it so you don't have to worry about your quarterly earnings. Tap into that purpose. And if you need help, Davin's your guy. You can get those links in the show notes below or in the description if you're watching on YouTube. Guys, thank you for making it to the end. And as I always ask, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, share this with somebody you know that's going to get value from it. Jason, talking about you. Share this with somebody, you know, I know you're watching as well, but also leave us a rating to let us know how we're doing. It's the best way you can give us feedback, and it helps us immensely on our algorithms. And as I always say at the end of the episode, everybody wants the sunshine, but they don't want the rain, but you can't get the pleasure without first the pain. Let's grow.